Okay, today we are making pulled pork. This is Traeger's recipe off the Treager website. It's a great recipe and it makes great pulled pork. It's also very simple. So, just to go over the recipe real quick, we're going to take our meat, we're going to season it, put a lot of seasoning on it, and we're going to put it on the grill in the Traeger at 225, and we're going to cook it for 3 hours. Every hour we're going to put a little bit of apple juice on it. You can spritz it, you can pour it, doesn't matter. Then we're going to turn the Traeger up to 250. We're going to move it to an aluminum pan. The aluminum pan will preserve some of the juices that we'll use later. We'll cook it for another 6 to 8 hours. After that, we'll take it, we'll chop it all up, we'll mix in the juices that the pan preserved, and we'll put some more seasoning in, and you're ready. So, great recipe, very simple, and yeah, it's hard to go wrong. So let's see, a couple of points. This is with 3 hours at 225 and 6 to 8 hours at 250. You've got to you're looking at a 9 to an 11 hour cook time. So I'm out here in the morning getting ready to cook. You've got to prep for this the day before, unless you like getting up really early or like eating really late. What else? I use boneless pork shoulder instead of what the recipe calls for, which is Boston butt or bone-in pork shoulder. This is a very inexpensive cut of meat. I paid $1.85 a pound. I've got almost 15 pounds here. The recipe calls for 5 to 7 pounds. I'm going to cook half of this. The other thing you want to make sure you have is lots of Traeger pellets, and you need to check the hopper on the Traeger because you will run out of pellets. You don't want to do that. So let's get started here. Step number 1, I'm going to cut this thing in half. I'm going to save the second half for later. One of the great things about pulled pork is when you finish cooking this, you're going to have crispy stuff on the outside, and you're going to have nice juicy meat on the inside. And then you're going to cut it all up, mix it all together, and it makes great texture. It's wonderful to eat mixed up like that. And so you might want to take some string and tie this together, or not. I'm just going to put it on the grill as is. The next step is to generously season with a pork and poultry rub or a pork rub, whatever you want. All right, I've got a Traeger pork and poultry shake here. I'm just going to coat this thing. You use a lot of shake doing this. Now let's see. When you put it on the Traeger, you want to put it fat side up. So there's the cap. There's the fat. Now I've never done beef brisket, but it's basically the same concept as pork shoulder. It's a real it's a real cheap cut of meat because it has a lot of connective tissue. It takes a lot of work to make that connective tissue taste good. So that's why you need the long cook time. You're going to stick the meat in the Traeger. You're going to cook it at a low temperature for a long time, and that's going to break down all that connective tissue. All right, now we have a seasoned pork shoulder, and I've got my Traeger running at 225. I'm just going to put it on in an hour. I'm going to come out and I'll show you how I put the apple juice on, and we'll go from there. And the end of this video, we'll be chopping this thing up when it's ready and making it into a wonderful sandwich. Here's the roast going in at 225, where it's going to be in here for 3 hours. Haven't done anything with it other than just place it on the Traeger, and off we go. I use either hickory or mesquite. Today I'm pouring mesquite. I also have some apple already poured in there. I usually do the mixing in the hopper. It can be a little messy, but okay, we are 1 hour into 3 hours at 225 degrees. It's time to put a little apple juice on. I just have a bottle of apple juice here. I've used cups in the past. I don't have a spritzer, so I just make do with what I have. The only thing you need to watch out when you do it this way is you want to make sure the little drip bucket on the side of the Traeger is empty, because you're going to be putting a lot of liquid into it. Alright. That is way more than is probably required. But heck, apple juice is cheap. And pulled pork is yummy. So, we'll be back in another hour. 2 hours into our 3-hour initial cook. Time for some more apple juice. Looking really good. The meat is starting to warm up. You can see the drippings on the foil underneath. All right, we're back at 3 hours into this. It's starting to look really good. All this glazing on the outside. Meat's starting to crackle. It just looks wonderful. Again, just pour a bunch of apple juice on the top. Now I'm going to let this sit for just a few minutes, because now it's time. It's 3 hours at 225. Now it's time to take and move this thing into a pan. A disposable pan is what I like to use. And then turn the temperature up to 225. So after we finish pouring, I'm going to let that juice sit for, I don't know, 10 or 15 minutes. And then we'll be right back out. Okay, we're back here. We're going to just transfer the roast. I'm going to use these silicone gloves, or heat protecting gloves. Pick this thing up, place it in the roast pan, and then the roast pan goes right back in, and that's going to collect all the juices that this thing is going to produce, and we're going to use that back after we cut it up at the very end. So, and now the other thing is we're going to turn it up to 250. We're going to cook another 6 to 8 hours. So periodically, every hour, every 2 hours, you've got to check the hopper. So you're going to start burning through pellets pretty quick at this rate. So, okay. I'll be back periodically to show you what's going on. 6 to 8 hours. We'll be cutting this up. You got to cook it at this temperature until internally the temperature is 190. So 6 to 8 hours, 190, whatever, however long it takes to get to 190. All right, we are about an hour out of our minimum time window, but this is looking really good. You can see that we got this nice glaze all over the roast. It's actually boiling down at the bottom. Let's see. And we're actually at 190, so we're at the right temperature here. Make sure we get that okay. Traeger's off. Put this in at about 7:30. It's 4 o'clock now. Actually cooked faster than I expected. So I'm gonna let it sit for about 20 minutes. I'll just let it sit in the Traeger, and then we'll be pulling it out and cutting it up. Let it cool a little bit longer. It's been 20 minutes since I turned off the Traeger. I've donned my very masculine hot pads. Alright, that I stole from my wife. There we are again. I mean, these pulled pork roasts, they come out so beautiful. I mean, first time I did this, I just said, I can't cut this up. But then I cut it up, and boy, it was wonderful. Well worth it. Okay. Inside, I'm going to take this inside. We're going to let it cool off a little bit more, and then we're going to start cutting. The roast on the cutting board. Now, before this cools off too much more, we're going to pour all the juices from that pan into this cup, and we're just going to let that settle. I like to get the biggest knife I own for this, because it's a big roast. Sharpen her up. Back to a cooking glove. Now, watch this. I'll cut this in half, and we'll take a look at the smoke ring. This is the beauty of the Traeger. There we are. Look at that. You can see the pink where the smoke came in. Just wonderful. I mean, you almost feel bad about cutting this up, but it's worth it. Try and trim some of the fat off of this while you're trimming. Like, all of this is probably a little fatty. Take any fat that you can. Otherwise, we're gonna cut it into strips, and then we're gonna cut it into pieces, and then we're gonna pull those pieces apart. So I like to cut against the grain. And you can pull it apart. Sometimes I'll just chop at it for a long time and chop it up. Now, one of the great things about pulled pork is you've got this real nice tender pork in the center, and you've got the real crispy pork and dried pork also from the edge, and you're going to cut and mix that up, and it's going to be a bunch of the texture of the sandwich and the flavor of the sandwiches that this makes is just wonderful. You got to watch your fingers. Make sure you keep an eye on where your fingers are. You don't want to be cutting through a big mess of pork and figure out that you just cut your fingertip off. That'd kind of ruin the whole barbecue experience. Might be awkward if you were cooking for your in-laws. At this point, I've got both pieces cut up. I've got half of it in a mixing bowl, half of it out here. At this point, you can add barbecue sauce, or you can add more of your rib shake or your pork shake. We're fans at my house of adding the shake, and not so much fans of the barbecue sauce. You can always add barbecue sauce after the fact. Serve it on the side. Your guests can add can add it as they desire, but I think it's great just with the rub and the smoke flavor. Well, I failed to come up with the turkey baster, but what I'll do is I'll use this measuring cup and we'll just decant the fat off the top. Okay, we're back with the gravy. We'll add the gravy. Need both gloves. We'll add the pork mixture to the bowl. Mix, 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 and then we'll be ready for a sandwich. Okay, this is a torta sandwich roll from Costco. This is, in my opinion, one of the best things you can get for pulled pork. A little bit of balsamic vinegar, I think, just adds a kick to it. Traditionally, this is served with cold slaw, either on the side or in the sandwich, depending on where you go. And you've got this wonderful mix of outside smoked meat, inside tender meat. There we go. So, this is going to be a good dinner. It's actually going to be a lot of good dinners and lunches. Oh, thanks for watching, and this is Traeger at its best.